Welcome to 312, the HRP Podcast, and welcome as well to Chicago. This episode was recorded at the National Brownfields Conference. If you're not in the know, a brownfield, simply stated, is a former industrial or commercial site where future use is affected by real or perceived environmental contamination. Sites like these are scattered throughout the country and are a key sector for HRP services. The Environmental Protection Agency's Brownfields program is a multi-billion-dollar program that provides the principal funding for communities in need to address brownfield sites. The National Conference brings together those communities, the EPA, consultants, vendors, regulators, and assistance programs for a comprehensive learning and networking experience. In this episode of 312, we're going to hear a series of quick interviews that cover all kinds of topics, from AI integration to sustainable plant-based remediation techniques to training the next generation of environmental consultants. Our Play Hard section is, as always, a video segment. This time, we're meeting with Randi Mendes, Executive Director of the UCONN Technical Assistance to Brownfields program. You'll be able to listen to the whole interview here, but hey, check out HRP Associates YouTube as well. We got some great stuff on there. And now, let's head to Chicago. So first, can you introduce yourself and who you're representing here?
Hey, my name's Kyle Gulau. I'm here with Brownfield AI.
Okay, and how does AI integrate with brownfields?
Well, that's a good question. There's a couple of things that come to mind. We're here specifically because we feel like there's an opportunity with Phase 1 ESAs. We know there's a lot of manual work that goes into that research and building that narrative around a report. So we feel like there's an opportunity there to help folks that do that work already do that more effectively and more efficiently. We know it can't do it all. We know that site visits are still part of the program.
Yeah.
But we feel like that can probably get a report maybe 90% of the way there, and then someone all you have to do is make a site plan visit.
Yeah.
The second piece of the puzzle, that's on the environmental side. I think the second piece of the puzzle is economic development.
Yes.
We've heard already from a lot of folks here at the conference that there's this calculation that needs to be made on brownfields and their economic impact. And because brownfields are a lot more nuanced than more traditional development, it's very difficult to estimate the true impact of if you're to take this super brownfield site. It's not technical language. Taking a brownfield site. Okay, we're going to put a 20-plex there. What's its estimated economic impact? And how do we source all this public information and, again, build a narrative so that a consultant or an attorney can go into the public and talk about the merits of the project with some really good sources? Because what we're hearing from a lot of public officials is that they want to ask more questions to validate the sources of information and those calculations. And we also know from the public, they want to understand exactly where their tax dollars are going. So we feel like there might be an opportunity there to provide that tool for a lot of folks that have to represent these projects in the public.
How do you see this transforming the workflow for on both the environmental side and the public sector side?
I think on the environmental side, what we're hoping we can do is that we can free up people who like doing the work in the fields. We can free them up from doing some of the more monotonous office work.
Yeah.
We see it creating it's an assistant to help you guys, I assume the listeners of this podcast are environmental consultants, to help environmental consultants free up their time to do the things that they enjoy most, which is, from what we've learned so far here at the conference, is working in the fields, kind of getting their hands dirty and trying to understand exactly what's going on in the soil and doing some of that more soil sampling and laboratory work.
What do you think is the ideal outcome for this kind of software if it's integrated large scale into the way that people approach brownfields?
I mean, ultimately, brownfields exist because there was a mistake made.
Yeah.
And the environment needs help. And if our tools can help accelerate the development and cleanup of these places, I think we've got a huge win.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right, well, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you very much, Tom.
Okay, so can you tell us who you are and who you work for?
My name is Jane Matheson, and I'm with ESDAT, and we're an environmental database solution based out of Australia, but we also have locations in Canada and the United States. I'm personally from Portland.
From where?
From Portland, Oregon.
Portland, okay, nice.
Yeah, and we provide environmental database solutions to all corners of the environmental field, so whether it's a government, a consulting firm, private sector, everyone has these robust sets of data that they're getting from their lab sampling, from monitoring in the field. We serve as that central source of truth. So you can host your data, you can understand it, you can export it, you can analyze it, anything you want to do really.
Yeah. And can you help paint a picture of like what some of those data sets are that people run into?
Yeah, so in the context of brownfields in particular, you're going to have a lot of contaminated soil, right? So what was done there historically, there's a lot of like maybe illegal dumping and just interesting questionable things in the soil. And so groups are coming in and they're sampling that, they're testing to see what is there, what work do we need to do to get it up to spec so that we can rebuild it and reuse this site. And so you're looking for heavy metals, you're looking for all sorts of other contaminants, and you're going to send people to the field, they're going to grab that soil, they're going to send it off to a lab, and the lab's going to give you a robust database back of all this information, and we want to make sure that people can synthesize it and use it.
And what would you say separates you guys from competitors doing similar data set work?
Yeah, so there's a lot of solutions in the market, and I think that is a good thing. For us in particular, we want to make sure that our software is usable by the common person, right? Our user interface is really simple. So whether you're an engineer who just needs to go in and check a particular result, or you're a project manager who wants to go in and see, is my sampling being done? Where are we in this project? You can navigate our solution without having a really deep technical background. You don't need to know how to code or anything like that. It's all simple to navigate, simple to customize for your use case without having to do a lot of, customization, detailed work on your side.
What would you say are some of the biggest issues that folks have encountered with their robust data sets, and how do you think you guys help solve those problems?
Historically, people have not always been the most thoughtful about data. It's just they're so focused on going out into the field and doing that work, and then they get all of this information back, and it's hard to handle at scale. So you'll have people who they'll have paper records still, or they get all these Excel sheets and they just sort of throw it in a folder and they say, well, I did my job, I took the sample, I have this information, and it's just going to sit there. People are not always also great at looking for errors. No one is perfect, no lab is perfect, no sampling process is perfect, and so sometimes you get data back that's not what you were expecting, and people don't always know how to deal with that. And so it's nice to have some technical background pop in and say, hey, I think based on our experience with millions and millions of spreadsheets, we think that there's something wrong with this row. We'd like you to take a look. People also don't want to go back to the labs and ask questions, and so we're happy to facilitate those conversations. And just in the long run, we focus on interoperability. Like wherever your data is coming from, it should be labeled in a way that's consistent so that as you move it to different use cases, it's understood by everyone.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today.
It was really nice to meet you.
Yeah, you as well. So first, can you tell us who you are, where you work, what you do?
I'm Ignacio Dairit. I'm with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, CCLR for short, and we're a nonprofit based in California, although we work mostly the West Coast.
Excellent. How do you think AI can transform the environmental consulting industry, things like phase ones and such like that?
Well, a lot of the information carries forward.
Yeah.
So, and what has to be updated is work on the site that could have caused environmental impact, like new construction, hazmat permits, what's stored there. And so that could probably be streamlined and just make it cheaper.
Yeah.
I don't know that you want to put that in a public database, but that's another possibility. But it does aggregating that information for quicker turnaround and for cheaper, more cost-effective phase ones.
And do you have any thoughts on the degree of disclosure that a consultant should or needs to have to its clients in terms of the use of AI in its work product?
It's very early. It's a very early industry, and I think every client has to know that AI was used in some way.
Yeah.
because that could be concern to the client's board or the client, the client's people. So just disclosing that.
Excellent. So first, tell us who you are, what you do.
I am Krista Stoneham, the CEO and president of the Houston Land Bank.
Excellent. So I work for an environmental consulting firm. We're looking at AI to be used to help us with phase 1 reports, because so much of that is kind of rote, finding, sourcing records and data, and then synthesizing it. So we're looking at streamlining that and bringing it to a more review process. What are your thoughts on AI for that kind of usage in environmental consulting?
Yeah, I would say that AI is as strong as you make it, or as weak as you don't invest into it. Being able to use the components either from your GIS analysis, it can summarize the attribute table. It can also help to use great sources that are already available, like from data.org, and just being able to analyze and summarize what the technical components are, make it easily understandable either for your client or for elected officials. I think it really can help to streamline the industry and just support the capacity needed for the technical experts that do what they do best, but might need some help with some of the storytelling or how to make a snapshot in an easier way of something that's so depth in the work.
And one more question for you. What are your thoughts on the necessity of ethical disclosures to clients about work product that in some way has been run through AI, and what do you imagine that looking like in terms of a disclosure?
Yeah, I think a disclosure could easily be just either on the report. It could be a part of the contract that you have if you want to just have the conversations, if they have any privacy regulations as a part of their corporate structure. So I think it's just understanding what is your client's comfortability level and then just being transparent. But I also believe that AI is really just helping to summarize the human intelligence, because you're not solely dependent on it. It's just helping to potentially improve your grammar or to help create the outline, but you still need original intelligence in order to really drive the conversation, but also being intentional about sharing that with your client to make sure that you're not unintentionally violating something with them that they may be concerned about, because everyone is different and everyone has different interpretations of what's best for them.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Excellent. So can you tell us who you are and what your company is?
So our company is called Willowstick Technologies. We essentially do 3D modeling of the subsurface.
Yeah.
We can track any kind of spillage, any kind of flow path, any kind of cavity underneath the ground without disturbing the ground. All our technology is non-invasive, so we can help in many different applications.
Can you tell us first, what has historically been the alternative to the services that you guys provide?
So the alternatives are the traditional methods that are, one, really old and they don't have as much reach as what we do.
Mm-hmm.
A good thing would be like resistivity. It goes down to 100 feet and it becomes kind of not as good resolution on it. We can go down to 6,000 meters and still get accuracy to the centimeter.
Yeah. So walk me through the benefits of your approach versus that traditional one.
So the benefits, say for an application of finding a well, a target for a water well, right?
Yeah.
The difference between our approach is that we are targeting the zones of porosity, which traditionally produce a lot more higher yield of water.
Yeah.
Like you can go with somebody we have a case study where a person drilled a well for 4 gallons a minute. 50 feet away from that zone. When we went back and they needed more water, we did a study for them. We got them 100 gallons of artisanal water pressure just by tapping into those high porosity zones.
Yeah. So how does your method work? In a kind of a 30,000 foot view, if you can.
We leverage a couple different tools, but our patent technology essentially is a algorithmic microseismic for one, which is passive microseismic, and then the other one is an electrical based technology, which pretty much we create an electromagnetic field and we're measuring vectors, altitude, and direction, and we can tell where a flow path is traveling through and how intensive it is.
Yeah. So if I saw you guys doing your thing out in the field, what would that look like?
You would see a guy with a backpack, depending on the size of the job. Obviously, if we are at a 5-acre property, you'll see a guy with a backpack with a round thing on top of his head behind his back, and he's just kind of kneeling down on the ground, for about 15 seconds, and then he goes on to the next point. And if you see us in a big area, you see a helicopter with a bunch of equipment hanging down, and kind of a bunch of people on the ground doing the same thing that the guy in a small property was.
Nice. Who do you think would benefit the most from the services you guys offer?
You know, that's a broad question because our technology is so broad applicable. Like we do work in mining, we do work for engineering companies, for stabilizing, finding cavities. We do work for mom and pop places that they just need a water well. So essentially anybody could benefit as long as they have the right need for it. We can apply the technologies accordingly.
Do you guys have a recent job that you did that you're like particularly proud of that you can tell me about?
So in Colombia, for example, we're working, they have an area over by the area in Venezuela. It's called La Guajira, which essentially it lacks water. It's pretty much the desert. We have gone there to do studies, and we have been able to find targets for water well zones that have been great output of water. That has been a really nice job that we've done. Aside from that, you know, a lot of mining jobs for dams that are leaking, that are unstable. We can go in there and tell them where the seepage is so they can stable them, and then we don't get a disaster like what has happened in Brazil where 4,000 people died because of the lack of just doing a study.
And where can folks who are listening go to find out more about you guys?
You know, you can go to our website. That would be the first thing, willowstick.com. And then you can kind of follow from there depending on the need that you have.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So can you introduce both yourself and the company?
Yes, my name is Renee Murphy. I am Director of Business Development and an environmental scientist for Intrinsics Environmental. We are an endophyte-assisted phytoremediation firm, so we provide nature-based technologies for your remediation efforts.
Okay, and what exactly goes into a nature-based remediation technology?
So I particularly love what we do because we do provide one of the few sustainable remediation efforts, but one that is truly green. So we implement specialized tree species along with combining it with specialized microbes. Now this is really cool. These microbes are specific to breaking down different contaminants. So we can inoculate a tree with a microbe that's specific to breaking down, say, oil and gas or a chlorinated solvent. And in situ, or in place, the tree is actually breaking down that organic contaminant in place, which is different than, say, for example, digging and hauling. Or any other very expensive, very carbon-intense remediation method. And generally speaking, if we talk about remediating, oftentimes it can be in underserved communities, and what is really cool about this technology is we ultimately leave the place better than we found it. Oftentimes the forest that's left over is turned into a community park or something for the community, which I don't think when you compare it to other methods of remediation that you have that same sort of result, right?
Now, I've heard of different remediation technologies that can trap chemicals within the plants, but you're saying that the chemicals will break down inside of the tree?
Right. So yeah, I think that is often the confusion with phytoremediation. It's just plants treat organic and inorganic contaminants differently, right? So when we're looking at organic contaminants, that is actually being broken down within the rhizosphere, in the root system, and up through the trunk of the tree. When we're looking at heavy metals and inorganic contaminants, we would actually treat that differently because the plant does trap the metals within their biomass. So yes, you are right about that, but I think instinctively everybody always thinks about the metals versus all the many contaminants that can be broken down within the tree.
If you were to imagine like an ideal site for this kind of remediation system, what are some of the features that site would have?
Something that's really, really big. I'm just kidding. An ideal site, I would say I would want to be working with organic contaminants because they are tried and true for our technology. We have many examples that we can show of success. I particularly love when a client comes to us and they are not only interested in remediating per se, but they also want to do some sort of restorative benefit. So I like when a client is open to us discussing, can we also put in like native vegetation back on that site? Can we restore biodiversity? Because we could hit several different elements, not just remediation, but can we take it one step further? And I think that's what we're looking for in the world, is really how can we restore now? Let's just not clean it up. Let's do better.
Yeah. Do you have any specific big success stories recently that you can share with us?
Our biggest success story would, like I said, be that Superfund site closure, because that is, I think, one thing people come to us is they don't think phytoremediation can be effective quickly. And I'd say under 5 years for no further action is quickly.
Yeah.
So we like that.
So for people who may not be familiar with that timeline, can you give us a sense of what it typically is for other kinds of remediation?
Well, there are remedial methods that will go on 10, 15, 20 indefinitely.
Yeah.
So that's where it can be kind of frustrating when there are many remediation methods that will continue on indefinitely even though they're not showing progress, right? So the fact that we are able to show that we can do remediation methods in 5 years, we can show improvements after 2 years. Even if it took 15 years to completely clean the property, ultimately the fact that you didn't have to remove anything from the site, and if there's no intention to redevelop immediately, then isn't that okay that it sits for 10, 15 years? Because many of the times remedial methods are going on that long anyway.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for talking to us.
Yeah. So can you tell us who you are and also the company that you work for?
My name's Ann Winiger. I am a professional geologist, and I've been in environmental consulting for over 25 years. My company here is EnviroLearn, and I just launched this last year. We provide online on-demand training courses for environmental consulting firms, economic development organizations, commercial real estate professionals, and students on environmental topics. So we have a course called Phase 1, Performing a Phase 1 Environmental Site Assessment for newer staff coming into an environmental consulting firm. And we have maps for Phase 1 ESAs. And then we have environmental aspects of property development that's geared towards economic development organizations.
Yeah. What do you think gives your training an advantage that makes it especially valuable for folks?
I think it's the that it has a lot of practical knowledge. Like, for example, the Phase 1 Environmental Site Assessment course provides, we go through an example project and we look at the different maps and how do you interpret those maps. We look at aerial photographs. We talk about here's how you can see these different operations that would be a concern. And so I think that gives it sort of like helps bring it home. Like, here's an example, and we use one example project through the whole course.
And you've been in the industry for 25 years.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your professional experience and how that informs the training?
My degree's in geology. I came out of college and went to work for a small firm. And one of the things that over my years through environmental consulting, I found that training staff was a challenge, especially newer staff. We would have entry-level staff come out of college and they wouldn't know what a Phase 1 ESA was. Or they would be learning how to do a Phase 1 from the staff that learned it a year before. And really what you want is them to be learning from the most experienced staff. But with, you have projects to work on, so, there's a challenge there.
Yes.
And I thought with this, there's consistency. It will give them a leg up when they are then they finish the course, they have a leg up and a foundation to go from. So
Yes, and also your most experienced staff may not be the best trainer or educator.
that's true. That's true.
You brought them in for their expertise in a technical field and not necessarily in their ability
Right.
to be a teacher.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
So what would you say is kind of the biggest value provided or added for this kind of training that do you think would really like seal the deal for someone who's considering looking into it?
I think the one thing would be that I think if I was in a different, a environmental consultant looking at this, I would really be glad to have something that's consistent, that I didn't have to put the effort into coming up with this program. And it's just like, I just need to, here's the email address that the student needs to, student needs access, and they go. So I think it simplifies it,
So what kind of feedback have you gotten on the training that's been implemented?
We've had the feedback we've had is that it's just an excellent tool to help train especially newer staff, and that the consistency of the training is kind of like a no-brainer, like let's make it easy for us all,
All right, well, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you.
Hello, John. Can you tell me who you are and where you work, what you do?
I'm John Evangelista, Executive Director of Groundwork Elizabeth. We are a 501c3 nonprofit out of Elizabeth, New Jersey, environmentally focused, and we do a lot of work in environment and youth development.
So what kind of work are you here to talk about at the National Brownfields Conference?
We have a unique microforest project we've been working on for the last 5 years, where we're building these tiny forests, and we're measuring the results of what happens underground with a local university. And we've had some fantastic results using the Miyawaki method, which is a Japanese botanist, Akira Miyawaki, came up with the concept of overplanting an area to increase the growth rate. And as this happens, it will also increase everything that happens underground with carbon sequestration and oxygen production. And we've been working on this project for 5 years. We have 5 forests built 1 year apart, and we're measuring exactly what's happening under the ground with Kane University, our local university. And we're finding that exactly what they said is going to happen is happening, and it's just been an amazing experience. And as this is all happening and it's giving the environmental benefits, it's also self-remediating the ground as well. So it's all a part of the natural cycle of redevelopment.
So microforest, normal sized trees, not tiny trees?
So we go in and we plant the trees about, I'm going to say, which number 7 pot, which is about 3 gallons. So
Okay.
about a 1 inch diameter, maybe 4 feet tall.
Yeah.
And we start them there. And in a lot that's, say, 50 by 50, we'll plant 250 to 300 trees in this one lot, all native. And we watch the growth rate and we see how fast it happens, and it's been amazing. The results so far have been exceptional.
Okay. What makes a project, well, I guess before we get into that, can you kind of just like paint a picture of, we talked about a little bit what this would look like if you just saw this project,
So
out there in the wild?
Yeah, it's amazing. So the first year you'd look at it and be like, okay, it's a bunch of sticks in the ground, about 4 feet tall. And that's where we started. Our 5-year forest now, just to give you an example, these are all native plants and all native trees. And our 5-year forest now, the largest trees at the time we planted were about 7 feet tall. They are now pushing 22 feet. the lower understory is up around 10, 15 feet, and it looks like a fully functioning forest if you saw it from the outside looking in. The beauty of these forests is that we're doing them in urban areas, so the community is benefiting from the not only the carbon sequestration, but the oxygen production, so we're cleaning the air. These forests also help with heat island situations and flooding. They hit all the environmental benefits, and they also bring a lot of health benefits with it as well for the community. In urban areas, people don't realize the noise pollution as well, and these things kind of buffer the noise a little bit. So we found some of our community members kind of sitting behind the forest and talking about how much they appreciate the fact that it blocks the noise and they can find some quiet time. So there's a health factor involved in this as well.
You know, I'd heard before about how some kinds of plants can kind of trap different contaminants and pollutants, but then different kinds of trees will actually chemically break down what they pull out of the soil.
And that's what we're finding as well as we're doing this. We went into this kind of open-minded, not 100% sure what the outcome would be.
Okay.
But we wanted to do it and we wanted to study it, and the big part of it was to collect the data so we would be able to prove it one way or another. And the results have been amazing. The science behind it is working as it plans to be, and the data collection is what's really going to benefit everyone from the true outcome of the project.
So what's like the total scope of the project now, the size of like when you look at everything that you've done so far?
So right now we have 5 forests in the ground, so we're probably covering about 10,000 square feet of forest space in the middle of the city of Elizabeth. In different locations, and we're looking to put 3 to 5 more in over the next 5 years to continue this process and continue studying it, with the hopes that the benefits that the forests are bringing to the communities will catch on, and we'll be able to build these things nationwide and create a huge impact on a small scale, which is amazing. You can do these forests as small as 2 parking spots wide and achieve the full benefit of a fully functioning forest that is that big, 50 years or older. So in these urban communities where you don't have a lot of land, to pop one of these in, say, a parking lot is gonna not only give the benefits of the forest as far as the oxygen production and carbon, but you're also going to help with the heat islands and help, with the parking lot and the surrounding area, cooling the temperatures down, and that makes a big difference now in these communities.
Yeah. What are some of the connections that you're seeing or thinking about or looking to make between the work that you're doing and the Brownfields program?
So we just recently were awarded the Brownfields training grant from the EPA. We're in Region 2, and we're looking to train as many people as we can on the benefits of brownfields and get people into the jobs and the careers and the career path that benefits from the brownfields, as well as green infrastructure and everything else. So I want to bring this theory to the convention here and speak to people about it and talk about it, but I also am here on an educational journey myself to just learn more about what's out there, what works, what doesn't work. I was at an amazing class the other day that was talking about how sunflowers are not the remediation that people thought they were. There was a concept that planting sunflowers would pick up the heavy metals in the soil, and I was very interested in this and looking into it, and I found out here that that's not actually how it works, and there's a lot of different ways around that, but the knowledge here and the wealth of information that I'm gathering is extremely beneficial.
So I think the application in an urban setting is, as obvious. Do you think that this has the same kind of potential or reach in more rural settings? I mean, where HRP does a lot of brownfields work is upstate New York, a lot of the old mill towns, so there's a lot of like natural growth forest that can come in. How do you see a program like this helping out those kind of communities?
So there's huge benefits to these, and the bigger you make them, the bigger the benefit factors are. So they work extremely well in urban areas because you don't have that forest and you have that lack of canopy coverage. They work just as well in urban areas. Cambridge, Massachusetts built a forest around the same time we built our first forest around 5 years ago. And I believe theirs is an acre or two big. And they're getting the benefits, that we're getting. It's much higher scale, but you can put these anywhere and the benefits are just amazing. The bigger the better, actually, but for the environmental impact. But again, in the urban areas, it's a much faster impact and a quicker canopy building project when you have a lot of these impervious surfaces.
Now, once the plantings have gone in, is there a lot of management that needs to happen after the initial round, or what is that like?
So what we do is when we build a forest, we put a 2-year maintenance contract in there with it if we're building them in properties that are hiring us to build them. So we manage the property. After 3 to 5 years, these forests become self-sustainable, and you really only have to watch them the first 3 years if there's a drought and they need water. That's the most important thing. The first year or two, you'll do some ground maintenance and weeding, but after the 3rd and 4th year, when the canopy starts to connect and the trees start to come together, they'll shade out the bottom, and it'll kind of it'll take care of itself in its own way and just do like a forest does naturally. So what's amazing about this is that we don't go in and weed. We don't go in and what we will do is maybe take some invasives out if they start growing in there, just to maintain that end of it. You don't want it overcome by invasives before it can really take hold. But other than that, after the 5-year mark, so far our forests have been self-sustainable, and we really don't have to do much work to them at all. It's just keeping them alive the first 3 or 4 years that is really the issue.
Cool. All right. Well, John, thanks so much for talking to us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Everybody, we are on the Depot campus of UCONN here. We are back from Chicago. We're here talking to Randi Mendes. Randi, can you introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Randi Mendes, and I'm the Executive Director of the UCONN Technical Assistance to Brownfields program. We like to call that UCONN TAB, and we serve Region 1, which is basically New England, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut.
So what is the TAB program? What does it do?
So we are a program funded by the EPA. Our task is essentially to provide free technical assistance to New England communities for all things brownfields. And brownfields is this term that not too many people are super familiar with, but essentially they are these sites that, due to their past history, have likely led to either known or suspected contamination. And similar to kind of this building right behind us, there's a lot of blight and economic issues and health issues that are created for these communities that are stuck with them.
Yeah, it's a great example too, because it's got this very interesting, beautiful architecture, but it's, an abandoned building, poses a risk to the community as well as whatever possible contamination it's on. And so we see structures like this, all over the Northeast, all over Region 1. So what do communities who are faced with this challenge, how can TAB assist them and help them?
Yeah, so the best part about our services is that they're completely free. So that's the most exciting.
Absolutely.
Yes, a lot of our services kind of fall into different buckets based on kind of the experience we've had working with these communities to best understand their needs. But at the end of the day, we hear out the community, hear out what's going on, and try to help them as in tune to what their need is as possible. But the big kind of buckets are grant support, so both helping with writing and reviewing. We can't write grants for anyone specifically, but we are allowed to review and kind of give suggestions on where to get data. That applies for both federal and state grants. We also do a lot of just inventorying. So a lot of these communities have these sites and are unclear, the full scope of how many they have, where they're at. And so we help both with identifying and then gathering some more information on them. We also help with redevelopment. So we don't necessarily do the whole redevelopment, but we'll help you vision through what's feasible for the site to be turned into.
Yeah.
And that includes renderings and a report that factors in any environmental issues. We do a lot of report analysis. So for example, if you've done an assessment or something, these reports are huge with a lot of jargon, a lot of complicated language. So we'll tend to review it and put it in a more digestible format for the community to better understand what's going on with the site. So that is kind of the more technical side of things. On the other side of things, we also do a lot of community engagement. So helping communities with putting on meetings, being that third party if they just need someone to kind of facilitate. We do a lot of work around dispelling myths around affordable housing, but pretty much anything that a community needs, we're happy to help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of jumping on that last point, what are some of those myths that you encounter around affordable housing, and what are the actual facts around that?
Yeah, so one of the biggest ones I would say is people assume that affordable housing just fits a certain group of people, but at the end of the day, all of us need affordable housing.
Yeah,
We all
absolutely.
need a place that we can afford to live that's not going to take up all of our income. So we find that a lot of people believe that it's just, like I said, for certain people, and so we try to dispel the myth that the actual numbers of it. So for example, Killingly, Connecticut did a study with their town where they looked at all the houses that were currently on the market and compared it to the average income of their population. And based on that income, there wasn't a single person that could afford any of the houses on the market. I think there might have been one that they said was affordable, but aside from that, none of them were reasonable for someone making the amount of money that lives in that town to actually afford.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the premise of what we talk about with affordable housing, is it's meant to be just housing so people can have that basic need of a place to live and, feel safe. But that's the biggest one. Some people also think that affordable housing brings in safety concerns, and there's a lot that has shown that that's not necessarily the case. And a lot of the people that are living in these places are just young professionals. It's another term that's often used as workforce housing. So
Yeah, it's great too, because in so many of these small communities, it's just a handful of people working on these grants, and they're not going to be able to bring in this kind of like expertise. So we crossed paths at the Brownfields Conference in Chicago, which, listeners have heard of all those interviews from at the beginning. But on the last day, you had a really great talk about communication, and specifically science-based communication when it comes to people who aren't in a technical arena. Can you tell us a little bit about what that talk was, some of the highlights of that?
Yeah, so our talk was called Talk Nerdy to Me, kind of a play on words to get some people excited about the topic. Essentially, the premise of it was to give communities, anybody attending, just some information on how to communicate some of these more technical things in a more simple way and how to be more inclusive with that.
Yeah.
I think, I tell a lot of people I hate the term dumbing things down, and I don't necessarily like layman's terms either. I prefer to say it's all about communicating effectively and understanding who your audience is and communicating in a way so that they understand and that they know that their ideas, their investment in time that they're there, makes sense.
Yeah.
So the talk essentially was both a little bit about understanding how that comes about, how those issues and that disconnect comes about, some tips and tricks for being better at communicating, a little bit about giving a pitch about yourself, and then my part specifically was kind of more the tools that UCONN Tab has to help make it a better, easier process when you are in that position. Because at the end of the day, there's technical topics that we're going to have to talk about all the time, especially in brownfields, and you have to figure out a way to get the community involved in a way that they're going to understand. So
Yeah. So what are like your top tips for effective communication?
So I would say the first one is always just knowing your audience, knowing what they value and what their interest and involvement is key. So you want to make sure that you're relaying why it's important to them. You don't want to just come in and say, oh, we're doing this for you, even though we don't know you. You don't want to be the outsider that's, telling a community this is what we're doing for you. You want to make sure that their ideas are heard. Sometimes you might be already talking to a more technical audience, so maybe you don't need to simplify things down as much. But maybe if you're talking to a community that has no idea what some of these contaminants are, it's helpful to kind of take a step back and kind of explain those things first.
Yeah, because you might be in a community where the brownfield issue is something that community's been dealing with for a long time, and the people who are showing up to those meetings, they're the ones that care about and getting involved, and they may not have the educational background, but they've been looking at the issue for years. So they're like ready to know, okay, what's next? What are we doing here? What are we doing about this very specific problem?
Right. And an example of that is we were in Bridgeport, Connecticut for a community meeting, and we were there asked to talk about brownfields and the TAB program, and the community pretty much didn't really care about that at the moment. And not to say that they didn't care because they didn't have the issue. It was more just they were concerned about the flooding going on. And the flooding did exacerbate the rest of the issues with brownfields, but the core of their concern was about flooding. So what we ended up doing is coming back and maintaining that relationship with that community, and because of that, it segued into a conversation about brownfields. So instead of just coming in and being like, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is what we're going to help you with, it was better to kind of understand what they cared about first, and then that helped build a better relationship and core of communication.
Absolutely. So what other advice would you have for communicating?
I guess another one that I mentioned during the presentation was having an acronym list. So especially in the environmental world, there's a ton of acronyms. Within TAB itself, there's a ton of acronyms. And even
TAB is an acronym.
Yes.
I think you said it in the presentation. Yeah.
And even things that you explain in the beginning, but then utilize the acronym again later, or even just complicated terms like some of the contaminants, have these crazy scientific terms like PCBs is an acronym, I think sometimes we explain it and think, oh, the audience remembers it for the whole rest of the time, but that's not always the case. So I recommended having a paper that kind of outlines all the acronyms that you're going to be using during that presentation, so people can kind of refer to it in their own time and not feel embarrassed to ask what that means, or not feel like, they're not smart enough because they don't know what it means off the bat. So that was another one.
Yeah, we do a whole other podcasts just about PFAS, and we do a lot of content, short form, TikTok, YouTube shorts about PFAS, and kind of the way we've approached it is wanting to like chunk information, very specific about certain things, and then if someone has questions like, well, what is PFAS, or what does PFAS stand for, we have individual videos like that they can go to. So kind of like specifying, chunking that kind of information. And
we've kind of done that with some of the one-pagers we've created on common contaminants found at brownfield sites. It's a very high-level overview of it, and the idea is that it's just kind of giving the basic information out there, and then if somebody's like, oh, this is really interesting, or I want to learn more, there's more information that they can then go beyond that. But we want to make sure that kind of the basics are covered first, and what's important to a person in terms of like their health and safety is covered, as opposed to inundating them with too much information. So
what are some of the ways that you can help communities kind of execute on these broader ideas about effective communication?
Yeah, so one of the tools that we created is a community meeting checklist. It's phased into kind of a planning, execution, and then aftermath kind of stage. I think we have different terminology for it, but that's essentially the stages it's put into. And on it, it's basically a guide to help a community make their meetings as accessible as possible. Some of the grants, and then just general basic good practice for these sites is to always continue to keep the community involved. But I think you see a lot of communities fall into the trap of, oh, we're going to have a town meeting and we're going to have it at 5:00, and that'll be the time when, these people can attend because they're out of work. But we've seen in most cases that that's not always the case. It's not always the most accessible time or location for people. Some of the town halls we've been to are not ADA compliant, so there's not wheelchair access. Sometimes if you're doing it after work, people have child care needs that are not going to be met anymore. So are you allowing children? Is there going to be some kind of entertainment, to keep kids busy? That's also oftentimes dinner time for a lot of people. So then you've seen people shift gears and do like a local place. They'll either meet, maybe on the site, or they'll meet at like a local brewery or something. And some communities have expressed to us that that's not always the most ideal either. So I don't know that there's a perfect solution to any of that, but the checklist kind of guides you through that thinking process so that you can understand, based on the stakeholders in my community, based on the community's needs and, demographics, so to speak, this is going to be kind of what we're thinking about and considering to make sure the information is most accessible. And then, we always encourage recording, posting, putting things in multiple languages, basically just kind of an overkill to
Yes,
share the
yeah.
information. And that way you're really trying to get as much of your community involved as possible.
Yeah. How important do you think, new media, kind of the stuff we're doing is for this kind of forms of communication? Because, a lot of the times when you look at the grant applications, the community outreach portions of them, they talk about putting stuff in the local newspaper. It's very like old media focused lines of communication that are, I think, starting to be less effective in terms of outreaching everyone in the community. So what do you think the role is for newer forms of media and social connection?
It's a very interesting conversation. A lot of these communities, especially in New England, are aging populations. So we do see larger populations of older folk, and they do rely on kind of the newspaper, Facebook pages, local communication, who they trust. That being said, there is this whole other younger population that's not often brought into the conversation when it comes to redevelopment of their communities, and eventually it will be their homes, their communities. And I think it's super, super important to involve the youth, and I think things like this really kind of help bridge that gap. And some of the efforts we've done has been connecting with libraries across New England to have some hubs for information. So that way the youth, maybe it's not super important to them in the moment, but if they hear it once or twice, eventually when they're in that position of decision making, or even now they can encourage themselves to be in positions of decision making, they'll be aware. And I think, ultimately getting information out, I don't think is ever a bad thing. So
yeah, I think there's a real hunger in young people to get more involved in their local communities. And I think for a lot of them, they just don't really know how. It doesn't really compute for them when to show up for stuff and what kinds of, challenges are out there. And I just think that's why it's so important to be hitting all of those forms of communication to bring people in.
I agree. And all it takes sometimes is, even if it's young, a kid coming home and talking to their parents about something that they heard. And then they're like, hey, I heard about this. What do you know about it? And then maybe now the parent is involved, or, the guardian is involved and can then bring it to their community. So I think it's an important connection, and thinking of different ways to access people, I think is always going to be a great tool.
I would love to hear more about making outreach, maximizing the inclusivity of it, like some of the challenges that communities may face in doing that, and the different ways that they can maximize that.
Yeah. I would say the biggest challenge that communities have is, or at least what we've heard from communities, is the same 10 people going to town meetings. So that is a very difficult task to fix, because I think people want a quick fix for it. So it's not something that you can fix overnight. Unfortunately, it's going to take time in building trust. And sometimes these communities don't have trust with their local government. So that's also a relationship that sometimes needs to be repaired. We do have a tool with TAB that we created called a stakeholder analysis, and that kind of helps a community identify people in their community and what their roles are in decision making. And so that can help a community that's just getting started to expand their access. Things like this are really helpful. We've done support with creating media posts, with articles, with creating web pages for people to disseminate the information out in different forms. But I think it's super important to connect with the community and to continue that connection, especially with brownfields. This work can take a really long time, and often we hear that people just think nothing's going on, when really there's a ton going on behind the scenes. There's assessment work going on, there's just grant writing to get funding, and I think you have to make that all very accessible to a community so that they know that the people in charge are doing something about it.
How important do you think it is to kind of set appropriate expectations for a community? Because we are talking about these programs do take a very long time from the ground to really completion.
I think it's necessary, and what convolutes all of that is you could literally be in the middle of a cleanup and then find more, and so now all of a sudden it's going to take longer, or it's going to take more money. So I think just being open and honest with the communication helps with that expectation. So as opposed to saying, this is what it's going to be, will be done in this amount of time, and then you don't say anything else, I think that's where the distrust in the expectations comes in, rather than if you're just kind of communicating with updates on what's going on and you involve the community in that decision-making process. So we always encourage, if you have a smaller committee, that you bring in community members, because ultimately it's their home, it's their area, they're going to be the experts.
So bringing it back to Chicago, What was your favorite part of the conference? Like, what do you think was the most informative or useful for you? I guess what was your favorite part about Chicago?
Yeah, so I guess one of my favorite parts about the conference itself has always been the networking. This one specifically, we have some new members on our team, so they got to meet some people from Region 1 and outside Region 1 and kind of get their feet wet a little bit in the world of brownfields. I like just kind of all the excitement surrounding the sharing of information that comes from these conferences. I kind of nerd out with the phytoremediation, bioremediation side of things, and there's quite a few talks on that, which I thought was really cool. But really just the interactions between people is probably my favorite part. There was a tab lounge where people could come in and ask us questions.
Yeah, that was really cool. Yeah.
So we got to meet a couple new people that we hadn't worked with before, and now we're going to be helping them this fall. So I think for me, without, being it's all about me, but my favorite thing has always been about helping people and always giving back in some way. And I really think it's an amazing program that exists around the country to give this free support to these communities, and the fact that we can kind of see an outcome in real time of these communities either getting the funding or getting excited about how a site can be turned into this or turned from this into something else that's going to benefit their community. I think it's my favorite part. And you see these communities that have been struggling for so long, and then when they find somebody that's going to help them, it's just like this sigh of relief. And that's probably my favorite part.
Yeah, it is really great to know, like when you're doing this work, to know that you are making a real impact and helping these communities. Yeah. So what did you enjoy most about Chicago?
So I guess outside of the conference, my team and I were very excited to try different foods. I love pizza. So we definitely tried quite a bit of pizza there. I think just seeing different areas where brownfields exist, because we're so used to New England being very mill heavy. So kind of seeing that exist in other locations. I now have an issue where I can't not find brownfields wherever I go. So we were looking around, but just kind of the city life is very cool. It's very rural where we are right now, so you don't really get that exposure. But it was nice to be able to kind of just like walk around and see the community and see how involved the community is in the city. So for sure,
You are you a deep dish believer now? I am, for sure.
Yeah, I really do enjoy deep dish, but I did try tavern style, and that was actually really good too. So.
What's your favorite place?
I don't want to get in trouble.
Fair enough. Okay, well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of 312. Before we sign off, Randi, what is the best way for folks out there to get in touch with you if they are part of a community that needs to get involved in the Brownfields program?
Yeah, so we have a UCONN tab email. It's uconn-tab@uconn.edu. We check that email all the time, and that's probably the best way to get into contact with us.
Excellent. All right, folks. Hope you enjoyed this one. Make sure to stay safe out there. Hit that bell for notifications. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. If you are still listening to us, thanks so much for sticking with the podcast. Rate us 5 stars on that. And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel where you can see us on the UCONN campus here. Randi, thanks again so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.